BMW's been on a real facelift drive recently. The BMW 1 Series, 2 Series, 3 Series, 4 Series and the X3 have all had updates, bigger or smaller, in the last 6 months. A smaller, lesser reported change has been that with the death of the 218i Grand Coupe, you can now no longer buy a non-M BMW with a manual gearbox. And that's a little bit sad because I have very fond memories of learning to drive in my old E30 316 Touring. But this is still here, BMW M2 with a manual gearbox, and so good on them for sticking with it for this one at least. For 2025, the M2 gets a power increase from 453 brake horsepower to 473. Torque stays the same at 406 pounds-foot, but it remains available until higher up in the rev range than before. From the outside, you'd be hard-pressed to tell that this is the new M2, because there are basically no visual changes. The only things are that there's a couple of new colours that you can get, like this fire red, and that for the princely sum of £175, you can now spec silver wheels, which clearly the BMW press office didn't. But there are bigger changes inside. Inside, the biggest change is the steering wheel. BMW and M in particular has been kind of the last holdout against flat-bottom steering wheels, but they've finally caved, and at the same time they've taken away some buttons, as is the way. There's other smaller stuff like some new air vents and new software on the infotainment screen, and that's quite an unusual thing because it's BMW M cars use a slightly different system to normal cars, and you get a few more buttons for the drive mode selection and stuff like that. So actually, even if you're driving just normally, it's a much less frustrating, much more relaxing thing to use than a normal BMW. The carbon bucket seats are part of the £9,500 racetrack package, which also includes the carbon fibre roof, carbon interior trim, and if you wanted, a set of Michelin Pilot Sport Cup or Pirelli's P0 track tyres. The most interesting changes to this new M2 are to the way it drives. They're quite subtle, but quite significant. So let's go for a drive now. So the headline mechanical change is that it has 20 horsepower more. It's up to 480 metric horsepower now. You know how it is with kind of internal differences with BMW. The M3 has just had a bit of a power bump, so this is now allowed a power bump as well. As before, it comes with an 8-speed automatic gearbox as standard, and for a bit extra you can have this 6-speed manual gearbox. And you really should, because it's such a rare thing to have nowadays. And it's also a great manual gear change, I think. Some people don't like it because, yes, it is quite rubbery, but it's short, it's precise, it's a bit notchy in a good way in that you can tell whether you're in gear or not. It just adds a lot more engagement to the driving experience. Of course, there's an auto rev match feature, but the pedals are really nicely spaced for heel and toe, so where's the fun in having it done for you, where you can do it yourself? The weird thing with right-hand drive manual M2s is that the pedals are quite far offset to the right, so they're not perfectly compatible with these carbon bucket seats, because you have this little carbon bit between your legs. You actually have to crank your leg around it to get onto the clutch. It's not too much of a problem. I just get the standard seats. They're still plenty supportive, they're a bit more comfortable, and they're cheaper. And I also kind of question the sense of lightweight bucket seats in a car that weighs 1,700 kilograms. To be honest, I don't really love this engine. I think the standard 3-litre, the B58 in the Z4 M40 or the M340i is actually a nicer engine. It's a bit smoother. This S58, it's got all the power, it's got all the response you want, but it sounds quite industrial, quite gravelly. I couldn't say for sure, but I do think that it's a little bit quieter than before. Most intriguing thing about this updated M2 is actually the chassis, because in their press release, BMW doesn't make any mention of changes, but both me and a colleague have driven it, and both of us would swear that it feels different than before. It feels a bit stiffer, which is not something that it really needed, because it's always been quite a firm riding car. It's got adaptive dampers, but you don't really need anything other than the comfort mode on the road in the UK. Anything like the sport mode or the track mode are just too firm. Compared to normal BMWs, non-M cars, you do notice that the damping is of a really high caliber. So even though it's firm, you don't feel like you're going to get bounced off the road. It always feels like it's really in touch with the road, and that's good. The other slight difference is that I feel that the front end is a bit keener than before. I never used to be a massive fan of the M2 before, because I always felt that I was waiting for the front end, and then when I added throttle, it would just grip and go. Whereas now, it just turns in a bit more keenly, and then if you add a bit of gas on the exit of the corner, it just rotates really nicely, like you expect a near 500 horsepower rear-wheel drive sports car to do. Something else BMW and MN particularly do really well is the traction control. So if you leave it on, it'll be nice and safe. Wouldn't do anything you wouldn't expect. But there's also an M dynamic mode, which is really good. Just lets you feel the car move around a little bit without any particular jeopardy. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to get crazy, and when it cuts in, it does so really smoothly. It's a great setting for the road. I've got it mapped to the M1 button on the steering wheel, and then if you want to go crazy on a track, you can use variable traction control, and it'll basically help you learn how to drift. The steering itself is pretty good. It's not quite at the level of a Porsche. It just feels a little bit more woolly than that, but it's well geared. You feel what's going on. It does the job. So with those little changes, I think this M2 is now really the 480 horsepower rear-wheel drive coupe that I always wanted it to be. And that, coupled with a manual gearbox, is becoming quite a rare thing. So what are the rivals for this? I think the Porsche Cayman GTS 4 litre is still the purer sports car. It's got the steering's a bit more keyed in, the engine's sensational, the gearbox is a bit sort of more snickety, I suppose. But that's a strict two-seater, and it won't be around for much longer. You can buy a V8 Mustang, great car, really like it, lots of fun, mega engine, but it doesn't feel like a sports car like this. It doesn't have the steering response, it doesn't have the body control, and so it's quite a different thing. Lotus Emira, fabulous car as well, but that's now £100,000 with a few options. When this second generation of M2 came out, people were comparing it to the first one and the 1M Coupe before that, which were smaller cars, and they were perhaps a little bit more exciting. But now that this has been around for a few years, memories of the old one are fading, and we can just look at it in its own right. And how great is it to have a manual 6-cylinder performance coupe that you can use every day? I think it's a great car.